The series begins with Riacha on foot right into a small shop making plans to promote an antique vinyl report. The store proprietor slightly appears at it, pronouncing its previous. However, Riacha argues that university college students on the town might probably purchase it earlier than he can say. Greater automobile pulls up out of doors at once, grabbing his interest. Seconds later it crashes right into a parked automobile and a person internal pulls out a gun, grabbing a teenage boy from the automobile. Riacha actions rapid, geared up to step in. However, the kidnapper fires a spherical of bullets. His men are forcing him to take cowl. He waits for the proper second, and whilst the auto begins evolved pulling off, he fires again. His shot lands, making the automobile spin out earlier than slamming into any other automobile. Losing no time, he is taking out the gunman, rushes to the boy and tells him they want to depart now earlier than backup arrives, as they may be approximately to run any other guy costs at them. Her reacts immediately, taking him down with a shot. However, whilst he appears nearer, he realizes the person is a federal agent. Understanding he simply stepped into a chief mess, he grabs the boy and takes to the air. Their breakout does not remaining lengthy, even though due to the fact a police officer spots them and begins evolved chasing them. The chase receives extreme with Riacha the usage of each trick he is aware of to shake off the cop. After some time he eventually loses them and unearths a quiet spot to cover with the boy he tells him to name for assist, making it clean that he desires to disappear rapid due to the fact that he simply took out a federal agent with an unlicensed gun. However, the boy, determined, begs him to live. He says his father has sufficient energy to restoration this and make all of it disappear, especially due to the fact that Riacha changed into handiest looking to store him. Riacha is not satisfied, however listens. Besides, whilst he asks the children's call, he introduces himself as Richard Beck. They communicate a few greater, and after a chunk of from side to side, Riacha eventually consents to go together with him. They force to Richard's domestic, and once they attain the big mansion gates, a bodyguard techniques. The fellow at once needs that Riacha step out of the auto for a seek. Riacha refuses before everything. However, Richard, maintaining it calm in a well-mannered way, asks him to simply go together with it. With a sigh, Riacha steps out, letting the bodyguard do his take a look at Ale, even though the fellow's mindset is a ways from pleasant. As soon as the quest is finished, they may be eventually allowed within the big residence. Richard introduces Riacha to his own circle of relatives and additionally to Chapman Duke, the pinnacle of safety. After the introductions, Riacha is taken to satisfy Richard's father Zachary, a person with severe energy and affect. They alternate greetings, and Zachary, absolutely thankful, gives Riacha a drink as a small gesture of thank you for saving his son. Riacha turns down the drink as they speak. Zachary asks him to give an explanation for precisely what came about all through the abduction strive. Riacha doesn't preserve, again announcing the man Zachary employed to guard Richard is absolutely vain. He factors out that the assault changed into deliberate from the begin. However, the so referred to as bodyguard simplest realize observed the threat on the remaining second, almost letting the abductors win. Riacha makes it clean that each one he desires is an area to put low for some days and a few coins to show for a faux ID so he can disappear. Zachary, understanding it may not be easy, admits that when you consider that Riacha stored his son's existence, he now owes him. He guarantees to suppose it over. Simply as Riacha is ready to depart, he grabs the untouched glass of liquor, keeping it for a second earlier than putting it go into reverse. He tells Zachary that if he desires to run his fingerprints, he may as properly make it clean for him. Zachary, barely amused, news tells him now no longer to take it. For my part, announcing he simply desires to realize precisely who he is managing. Riacha would not flinch and virtually reminds him that he is the only who stored his son. Later that night time, Riacha finds Richard in his room portrait. He casually factors out how bizarre it's Miles that Zachary hasn't for my part checked on him after the whole lot that came about. However, Richard says they already talked at the Telesil smartphone proper. Then the person informs Riacha that Zachary desires to see him once more after they meet. Zachary says that Riacha has already made the information the report shop proprietor gave the police a stable description of him. The simplest proper element is that the outline is just too indistinct when you consider that Riacha seems like any linebacker on a soccer group. Nobody can well discover him, but Zachary then tells him that his group did a few digging into his beyond, and after seeing what they determined, they are each taken aback and critically inspired. Riacha sits throughout from Zachary, while out of nowhere the businessman tells Paulie to position a gun at the desk. He then orders Riacha to play Russian roulette, trying to peer if he can observe orders. Riacha isn't always pleased. Approximately the concept when you consider that it is each reckless and unlawful. However, Zachary makes it clean that that is the simplest manner ahead without actual choice. Riacha choices up the gun, spins the cylinder and pulls the cause. He does this almost 4 instances earlier than Zachary all at once takes the gun again, searching. Glad with a nod, he accepts Riacha into his group. As they go away the room, Riacha tells Duke to go back his gun. However, Duke refuses. He says handling Paulie is already sufficient and he doesn't need some other loose cannon strolling round with a gun. Smirking, Riacha claims he wasn't fooled and knew the gun wasn't loaded there. Entire time Duke maintaining a instantly face proves in any other case with the aid of displaying that the gun became absolutely loaded. This surely catches Riacha off a protect. Riacha then asks what they might have achieved if he had surely ended himself. Duke with zero emotion says they might have treated it much like they did with the final man. Later, Riacha is taken to his new room. Duke tells him that he is beginning painting's first component inside the morning. However, Riacha sincerely is not satisfied. Approximately the agenda. Duke then factors out that even as Beck would possibly agree with him, he does not. As soon as Riacha is subsequently on my own, he very well examines the room for hidden cameras. After ensuring nobody is looking, he pulls a hidden Telesil smartphone from his shoe and dials Susan. The decision is brief, however he confirms that he is in some days in advance. Riacha sits with the aid of using the roadside, quietly looking the whole thing round him. He spots a younger boy seeking to thieve and without delay stops him. In preference to creating a scene, he fingers the child a few cash and tells him to discover sincere paintings proper. After that he sees the person he has been maintaining a watch on strolling out of a constructing and moving into a vehicle. Riacha attempts to observe, however side visitors makes it not possible to preserve Riacha realizes he is approximately to lose his target, so he quick asks the child for his Telesil smartphone. He dials the 110th unique investigator and asks to talk with the commanding officer. However, he is advised that important Turner is not to be had. He then asks Officer Powell to buy Skip on a message asking for a name returned as quickly as feasible. Powell informs him that Turner might not be to be had for some other weeks. Not looking to waste time, Riacha asks him to run a registration code. Powell is bowled over for a second, knowing he is speaking to the founding father of his branch. However, quick regains his composure and asks for the plate-wide variety, but there may be a difficulty with the gadget, and Powell tells Riacha he's going to attain out while it is returned up. Riacha tells him to word down his cutting-edge vicinity earlier than finishing the decision that night. Even as a domestic, Riacha hears a surprising knock at the door. A voice claims to be a federal agent, immediately setting him on facet. Losing no time, he jumps out the window to break out. However, his plan fails. Susan Duffy is already watching for him. In a while they take a seat down for a protracted dialogue. Approximately an ongoing federal research right into a shady rug import commercial enterprise known as Bizza Bizza. The DEA suspects the employer is not simply dealing in rugs. However, smuggling something a lot worse into the United States of America. They then display Riacha a photo of Zachary and ask if he is aware of him. Without hesitation he denies any connection. The sellers but press him for assist. Earlier than agreeing to something, Riacha lays down a circumstance. They want to music down a selected Asian American guy for him. Some days later the sellers go back with the statistics. The person is Xavier Quinn, a corrupt military intelligence officer with a darkish beyond. As soon as concerned in unlawful sports, Quinn become believed to had been shot with inside the head and tossed off a cliff into the ocean. Come what may, he survived. Now he's again and operating with Zach and his organization. Weird as Riacha and Susan step apart for a personal speak, she stocks some other critical piece of statistics. A well-reputable agent, Teresa Daniels, had long gone undercover internal Beck's agency to reveal its authentic operations. However, she has, due to the fact that disappeared without a trace, determined for solutions. Susan is inclined to apply Riacha as an unofficial operative to infiltrate Beck's commercial enterprise, discover Teresa and music down Quinn for his personal undertaking to make this paintings. She admits that Richard's kidnapping become absolutely staged. The whole lot become planned to make Riacha appear to be a hero. Benefit Zachary's consider and get him internal. Over the following few days the group fine-tunes each element to make certain the plan run easily. Stephen, one in all their operatives, is assigned to play the shooter with inside the faux kidnapping. He practices making the assault appearance as actual as viable. The use of faux bullets, even the staged homicide of a cop, become a part of the setup designed to make certain Riacha had no preference however to move underground again with inside the gift. Riacha is prepared to execute his undertaking. He assures Susan that he will test Beck's property for something suspicious that night time. As soon as the whole residence is asleep, he movements the use of the roof as an access factor. He sneaks in the equal constructing wherein the Russian roulette sport occurred. As he cautiously explores, he stumbles upon an underground cellar. What he reveals catches him off. Protect a sparkling half-eaten plate of meals. Without losing time, he pulls out the hidden Telesal smartphone from his shoe and calls Susan. Her first query is whether or not Teresa is the simply. Then Riacha spots a bracelet. He tells Susan that Teresa is not the. However, she truly become over the decision. Susan insists that Teresa become truly being held as she asks if there is something else, and Riacha mentions the half-eaten plate of meals. This makes Susan recognize that Teresa is being fed and brought care of even though she become abducted. However, her speedy reminds her that this is not appropriate information if they may be preserving her alive. It is due to the fact they want her for something, and which means hassle. As the decision ends, Riacha spots Duke pulling up in his vehicle and Speedy hides. In the meantime, Susan finishes the decision and storms over to Zachary's bodyguard John Cooper, the one answerable for looking Richard. She needs solutions, approximately Teresa's whereabouts. However, earlier than matters amplify, Gavena steps in, urging her to live calm. Returned on the property, Riacha attempts to sneak. Returned to his room, however, he overhears Duke speaking to a person. The communique appears essential, so he follows quietly. While he realizes Duke is heading towards his room, he speedy modifications path, finding out to climb the outdoor of the residence as opposed to the usage of the hallway. He cautiously measures the outside, slipping internal simply. Earlier than Duke reaches the door, Duke knocks numerous instances. However, while there is no solution, he receives suspicious and forces the door open. Simplest to discover the window extensive open. Assuming Riacha has escaped, he is approximately to analyze. In addition, while Riacha casually steps out of the restroom performing like not anything occurred, Duke tells him that they have accumulated intel at the car utilized in Richard's kidnapping. He orders Riacha to analyze and tells him to be downstairs in 2 minutes. Losing no time, Riacha calls Susan and tells her to get to the area earlier than him. His issue is straightforward. Beck ought to now no longer discover the auto used with inside the explosion. Consistent with their Cowell story, the abductors blew up Beck's vehicle earlier than looking to take Richard, killing his motive force with inside the method. If Beck's guys discover the auto, they will assume to peer blood and mind. Remember, internal, if there is none, they will realize something's off. Reacher is aware the stakes. If Beck begins evolved doubting him, the whole mission ought to disintegrate. There is not a whole lot time left, and he urges Susan to transport Speedy at the manor to the impound lot. Angel Doll and Reacher have interaction in a communique of their vehicle. At some point of this communique, Angel offers Reacher loads of latest statistics that he had no concept approximately that is, in which Reacher additionally discovers that Angel has run a tab on him and is likewise conscious that he changed into as a cop with inside the army. Furthermore, Angel well-known shows how he changed into it inside the army is properly. Then Angel explains how his nickname changed into given with the aid of using his originated from his grandma, as she used to name him Angel Doll due to the fact he received the maximum stew infant contest on the country fair. Amazed Reacher thinks there is no manner Angel can win any contest. It is worried with splendor. Reacher then unearths out that Beck promotes humans from inside. However, then he additionally unearths out that Beck isn't always the only pulling strings. In the meantime, performing Speedy, Susan rushes to the scene together with Go. Decided to dispose of the auto earlier than Beck's guys arrive. Susan is going internal the lot at the same time as Go comes to a decision to preserve an eye fixed out of doors from interior. Susan Atkins tells Gero that is going to make an effort due to the fact she has wreckage to transport, but Susan struggles to transport the automobile. Listening to her warfare, Gero gives to assist. However, Susan turns him down, pointing out that she wishes him to inform her whilst Reacher arrives. In the meantime, with inside the vehicle, Reacher asks Angel how he goes to influence the cop to allow them to interior. Angel tells Reacher that no nighttime shift operating police officer will deny a $500 bribe, but Reacher asks what he'll do if this plan doesn't. Paintings in reaction, Angel simply casually reveals his gun tucked in his pants. Simply as Susan's operating on pushing the wrecked vehicle out of the manor, Reacher and Angel Doll arrive on the scene straight away. Gurmo informs Susan approximately it, inflicting her to panic. Interior, Angel tries to bribe the officer on the reception table to benefit get right of entry to and take pics of the truck. He makes up the tale that his fiancée will discover that there are a few property of any other girl in his vehicle, but the police officer refuses the bribery, pointing out that it is simply his second week and he does not need to be fired. Seeing the officer refuse, Angel slowly starts to attract his gun, reacting instantly. Reacher knocks the police officer out with a unmarried punch. With the instantaneously chance neutralized, he and Angel Doll continue into the lot. After looking there for some seconds, Angel unearths the truck he is meant to take snapshots of. However, as he is leaving, something catches his eye, an automobile that appears precisely like Richard's vehicle. Alarmed, he factors it out to Reacher. Examining the automobile even similarly, Angel sees that it's far wrecked in a manner that looks as if the truck he simply took snapshots of hit this vehicle. In the meantime, Susan is hiding underneath the automobile, seeking to live as quiet as feasible. She's additionally seeking to grasp the screwdriver that's out with inside the open. Seeing her attain out to it, Reacher slides the screwdriver beneath the automobile together along with his leg. Furthermore, due to the fact Susan had already switched the plates, Reacher easily dismisses the priority. He insists that it is simply any other vehicle, certainly considered one among many comparable fashions with inside the metropolis. Angel believes that a military cop could recognize such things as those, so he dismisses his problem is properly glad Angel Doll drops Riacha off at Beck's domestic. Getting out of the automobile, Riacha proceeds to go into the mansion. However, Angel calls him out, telling him that they may be purported to burn the automobile that he stole in advance. But Riacha motives that he's tired, so Angel makes a decision to do it himself. Upon getting into, Riacha sees that his room's door is barely open. Simply then he notices the maid exiting his room. This at once increases pink flags. His room does not require cleansing, making her presence rather suspect. So he asks the maid if Duke requested her to look his stuff, including that he failed to convey whatever with him. The maid is aware of that is authentic due to the fact she failed to discover any laundry. After a short communique, Riacha shall weird slide. For now, trying to relaxation, he lies down. However, his time to relaxation is reduced brief while Zachary knocks and enters. He informs Riacha that there may be paintings to do, then leaves. But earlier than warding off, Beck visits his son, assuring him that the abduction incident may not appear once more. But Richard explains to his father that he's scared for his existence each time while he appears at himself with inside the replicate someplace else on the fitness center. Riacha has an anxious interplay with Paul Van Hoven aka Paulie. Paulie inquires approximately Riacha's bench press numbers. However, Riacha says that weightlifting is an beside the point degree of authentic power. Alternatively, he demanding situations Paulie to a recreation to be able to actually take a look at their strength. He explains to Paulie that Bavarian arm wrestling is the first class manner to show one's power, a recreation that Paulie has by no means heard of but keen to show himself. Paulie takes the bait. Riacha then asks Paulie to vicinity his elbow at the bench pad, then asks him to make a fist, after which asks him to apply all his power to forestall him from pulling his hand down, because each of them are the use of their whole power. Riacha all at once shall we move of Paulie's hand. As a end result, Paulie finally ends up by accident hitting himself at the nostril. However, Riacha fast motives that his hand slipped. This makes Paulie even angrier as the two get prepared to take every other's lives. However, earlier than matters amplify, in addition, Duke arrives and intervenes, setting a forestall to the combat. Duke then assigns Riacha activity he should shipping a truck to a drop-off vicinity in New London, Connecticut. The car can be tracked through GPS. That means Riacha cannot take any detours. He is likewise strictly forbidden from analyzing the shipment. Furthermore, Riacha is likewise forbidden from taking espresso ruin. The most effective ruin he's allowed is while he desires to apply the restroom, sensing this is probably every other. Take a look at Riacha touch Susan. He explains that they want to decide what is with inside the truck without elevating suspicion. Susan thinks that it is probably feasible that Riacha is wearing Teresa in his truck without them understanding. Simply then Riacha famous that he's on a timeline and they need to hurry, so that they agree to satisfy at a fuel station wherein Susan's group can discreetly take a look at the cargo whilst making it seem like Riacha is simply preventing for espresso earlier than finishing the telesells. Smartphone name Susan deactivates the speaker mode and appreciates Riacha for process properly achieved with inside the impound lot. After his telesell smartphone name with Susan, Riacha touch Negli, an antique pal of his. There he asks for her assist while she consents. Riacha explains that he wishes her to run jackets on some names. He asks her to get greater information about Paulie, Angel and Duke, giving her their complete names. Riacha then tells Negli that he goes to name her in an afternoon or to pay attention what she has observed out. However, Negli tells him that she is simply going to name him, but Riacha tells Negli that he cannot be speaking together along with his allies due to the fact he's on an undercover mission, while Negli attempts to invite Riacha, who he goes after. This time he ends the decision, as soon as all of them attain the fuel in station, Go unlocks the truck, locating out that there are Ug's best. Quickly Susan's pal Dick Grunert arrives together along with his canine named Pfizer, but after a thorough seek they locate no symptoms of medication or not anything. The truck is absolutely empty. Thereafter Reacher tells Susan to invite Dick if Teresa's frame is probably there. However, Dick explains that Pfizer could have smelled if there has been a frame lifeless or alive. This confirms Reacher's suspicion. It is now no longer approximately smuggling that is a loyalty check, so he comes to a decision to quick-head returned to the street, a good way to now no longer enhance any greater suspicions. As they're en route, Susan asks Reacher why he instructed her that she isn't geared up to look Teresa's frame with inside the truck. Reacher explains that he as soon as turned into running with infant and he or she turned into similar to Teresa. However, then something occurred to her so terrible that Reacher cannot install his phrases. Reacher drops Susan off at Guo's and heads directly to the assembly spot. He pulls up, palms over the truck and watches because the man tests the returned while all he reveals are Uggs. Reacher performs alongside performing. Amazed, they inform him to hop in every other truck and take off for the warehouse while he receives a returned Angel doll. The equal man from earlier than is ready. This time he is. Were given questions he would not agree with Reacher and makes it clean that he is suspicious. He thinks Reacher is mendacity, approximately who he's. Reacher would not anticipate matters to worsen earlier than Angel can do something. Reacher grabs his head and slams it into the desk, killing him in a single flow. He drags the frame beneath the desk, making it appearance every day. Then he steps outdoor. Duke is already the honking while Duke asks what took. See you later. Reacher simply says Angel wouldn't forestall. Speaking, Duke drives Reacher lower back to Beck's mansion and brings up Angel doll's name to Beck, announcing there may be information. Reacher acts like he failed to listen, something vital. However, Duke says Angel left a voicemail, losing Reacher off. Duke mentions he has matters to attend to even as Reacher is off obligation with inside the kitchen. Reacher washes Angel's blood off his fingers and it fingers him a sturdy purifier that trusty the mechanic makes use of even as consuming. He brings up Beck's mechanic, thinking why he desires one while all his vehicles are new. Annette says she does not ask questions and mentions Beck's upcoming 50th celebration. Duke is available in places away Reacher's dishes and says Beck has questions on Angel's voicemail on the grounds that Angel isn't always answering his Telecel smartphone. Duke orders Reacher to return back in conjunction with No Danger to seize a weapon. Reacher follows in Beck's workplace. Beck says Angel's message hyperlinks the pickup plates to Acquainted Institution. However, Reacher's description of the kidnapper does not suit all people from the Beck begins evolved doubting him. However, Reacher shows the institution may have employed new humans. He pushes for greater information. However, Beck refuses and sends him to his room. Reacher makes use of a hidden Telecel smartphone in his boot heel to name Negley. She says poorly as soon as injured superiors with inside the army and met Angel with inside the brig even as serving time for sexual attack. She additionally well-known shows Duke was a cop and gives to assist. However, Reacher turns her down, announcing the goal is simply too risky. While he mentions the goal is a person he killed years in the past, Negley right away guesses Quinn and needs to realize in which he is. Reacher hangs up, understanding the decision is untraceable. He then calls Duffy, asking her to depart to automobile with garments in a towel close by after middle of the night. Till then he naps in the dead of night. He strips to his underclothes and swims alongside the coast. Duffy waits via way of means of the auto and texts Go, announcing Reacher isn't always the but simply then a soaking moist and nearly naked Reacher walks out of the woods, startling startling her, she fingers him the bag of garments, elevating an eyebrow as he adjustments. Stepping into the driver's seat, she insists on staying to look for Teresa at the manor. Reacher explains their plan to make Beck trust the abductors might not go back. He also recollects a barn wind chimes and a creaking door, then tells her approximately Sergeant First Class Dominique Cole his buddy on the warehouse. They climb over the fence and raise a cord. Interior Reacher indicates her Angel doll's corpse. She remains calm, takes Angel's computer and unlocks it. Together, along with his fingerprint, they discover not anything on Teresa, irritating Duffy. However, as a minimum now they recognize she is not there. Searching outdoor, Reacher spots numerous transport bins close to the teach tracks. They placed Angel's frame with inside the trunk of certainly considered one among Beck's motors and force it into field 13. Reacher takes Angel's gun earlier than locking it whilst cleansing up the blood. A truck arrives. Reacher sees Belina and Sklar step out and is aware of they will shoot on sight. He and Duffy disguise, then ambush them with a crowbar and a bat, killing them. They disguise their bodies in field 14 earlier than Duffy drives. Reacher returned to the street. He places Angel's gun in a bag, strips to his underclothes once more and swims. Returned to Beck's property. Duffy turns her returned, however, whilst he palms her the garments she sneaks some other look. Their component approaches and he swims returned, hiding Angel's gun many of the rocks earlier than heading interior. With inside the morning, Beck is panicked, approximately lacking drivers. Reacher gives to assist, so Beck tells him to take Richard into Metropolis for purchasing. As they go away, Reacher speeds beyond the GAT residence, forcing Paulie to leap apart. Richard warns him now no longer to debris, with Paulie calling him a psycho. Reacher asks why Beck shall we a psycho stay in his residence, and Richard explains that B is in reality irate now, no longer his father. He says McCabe is even worse than Paulie, whilst Reacher asks approximately Beck and McCabe's commercial enterprise. Richard insists that Bizarre best sells rugs at a toy shop. Richard buys an antique toy gun for his father's birthday. Whilst Richard is interior, Reacher calls Duffy and tells her a massive order is coming in. He says he desires a merchandising to Duke's role, so Duke must be eliminated. Duffy sends Beck a phone message from Angel to set to entice. In the meantime, Richard leaves the shop together along with his purchasing bag, however runs into 3 former high school classmates there. Lead one takes his bag and stomps on it, breaking the toy gun. Interior Reacher arrives and warns them to depart. Richard on my own, however, whilst they decline, he fights the trio and leaves them at the floor on the transport yards. Duffy and GMO spot Beck's vehicles departing with shipment from Slip 7. Duffy evaluations the manifest on Angel's computer and by accident shall we it slip that Reacher kills Angel. They observe the vehicles returned in Metropolis. Richard sooner or later confesses that Julius McCabe now runs his father's enterprise and controls each factor in their lives. McCabe orchestrates the primary kidnapping and is liable for reducing off Richard's ear even though it smiles Paulie who does the reducing. Beck's enterprise in place of simply uploading rugs is greater, approximately circumventing policies. Reacher speculates that McCabe is the use of Beck's network to smuggle tablets. Richard is not sure approximately the precise contents being shipped on the docks. Duffy and Go capture surveillance photographs of Beck's guys unloading the vans, with Paulie overseeing the technique. A vehicle arrives and Julius McCabe steps out. Duffy calls Stephen to relay what they have visible, leaving Cooper unattended. Stephen steps away to speak. In the meantime, Cooper notices the pointy factor at the lower back of the chair, intentionally leans lower back and gouges the lower back of his head. Whilst Stephen returns, Cooper complains approximately the ache and persuades him to smooth the wound. He tries to bond with Stephen, however the agent stays cautious and returns to good-looking TV. Cooper then eyes the bottle of rubbing alcohol at the desk with a contemplative expression. Reacher and Richard go back to Beck's property, and word that the gate is left open. Paulie has noted his typical post with inside the gate residence. Beck and Duke are making ready to go away. Simply as they come, Richard heads interior. Even as Duke locations a bag with inside the trunk, Beck informs Reacher that Angel sends them and Cope within Hartford, and that they're heading out straight away to dispose of the meant would-be kidnappers. Reacher stalls, pronouncing he wishes to apply the restroom. As soon as interior, he sneaks out through the kitchen front to seize Angel's gun assembly. Beck and Duke out the front. He listens as Beck guarantees an advantage if he does properly in this process. At the manor, Beck mentions that the ice cream keep proprietor referred to as approximately what Reacher did to the bullies. Duke says Richard wishes to enhance up, however Reacher could not care much less approximately his opinion. They attain the upload. Get dressed below the quilt of darkness. Beck orders them to wipe out the whole gang as Duke and Reacher technique the secure residence. Reacher convinces him the residence most effective appears darkish and deserted due to the fact the group wishes them to assume no one's interior. Duke insists on moving into first and kicks the door open. Reacher takes the risk to disarm him and needs to recognize in which Teresa is. Duke refuses to speak, pronouncing McCabe will kill him if he doesn't. Laughs on the concept that Reacher might do whatever to him without hesitation. Reacher shoots him with inside the head. Understanding Beck is ready out of doors, listening for symptoms of a combat. Reacher fires all of the weapons into the partitions, then he smashes himself with inside the face with the pistol butt to make it appear like an actual battle. He masses the microwave with aerosol cans, units the timer for 30 seconds and bolts out. The residence explodes right into a fireball. Reacher sprints lower back to the auto and tells Beck to force as they break out. He reviews Duke is lifeless, claiming they have been ambushed. He arms Beck Angel's gun, pronouncing one of the attackers ought to have dropped it. Beck right away acknowledges it and comes to a decision. Angel became a traitor. Reacher subtly shows the two lacking drivers have been additionally a part of the ambush. Glad Beck says Reacher has earned his bonus and promotes him to Duke's function as second in command at the manor. Lower back to Beck's residence, Beck calls Julius McCabe to inform that Angel Doll betrayed him and that Duke is lifeless. After the decision, he tells Reacher who McCabe is. In the meantime, on the cabin, Duffy and Gurma leaf through surveillance pics of McCabe's operation. Whilst a vehicle pulls up, they seize their weapons and flow closer to the door. Reacher walks in and tells them the entirety in Hartford went as planned. Duffy is disappointed that the Deer secure residence were given destroyed, and Go is irritated that Reacher killed Duke simply to take his region. Duffy indicates Reacher image of McCabe and Reacher is greatly surprised. McCabe is definitely Quinn, the person he had already killed. Gilo attempts to locate extra records on Julius McCabe, however reveals not anything. Duffy needs to recognize why Reacher needs Quinn lifeless, however he remains silent. She continues pushing him for a solution. The tale then shifts to a flashback with Inside the Beyond. Reacher became a solo Army police investigator. General Leon Garber tests in on a case and tells Reacher that Sergeant First Dominique Cole will help him due to the fact he has an excessive amount of paintings. Garber additionally mentions an early model of what is going to later end up the 110th unit. Whilst Cole arrives, she reviews for duty and Reacher tells her to simply name him Reacher. As he explains the case, he notices her searching round and asks Hat is incorrect. She says she has heard approximately his strict however honest popularity and efficiently guesses that he most effective simply discovered out approximately her venture. Reacher confirms this and offers her the case file even as he receives espresso. As he pours, he asks why she thinks Gorowski is promoting Blueprint. She right away shows that he became pressured into it. He is in his 40s, has no crook records and has own circle of relatives. so he would not appear to be the sort to do it willingly. Inspired, Riacha orders a second chair for her. Later they stake out GSK's dead drop in a park, even as ready coal stocks that she used to seek help together along with her father who died 5 years in the past. However, she nevertheless is going looking. Riacha in brief talks approximately his personal father. Whilst the pickup takes too lengthy, they step out of the auto and comprehend they have been looking the incorrect rubbish can. The actual drop passed off at every other can 30. Backyard away. Riacha determine. Ed comes to a decision to deliver Gorosky in for wandering and bluff him at some point of Cole's interrogation. Gorosky confesses that he gave up the blueprints due to the fact criminals abducted his 4-year antique daughter to show they might manipulate him. Looking from the statement room, Riacha is inspired with the aid of using Cole's abilities. Gorosky refuses to call anybody, scared for his own circle of relatives' protection. However, Cole warns him that the criminals will hold the use of him till they do not want him anymore. Then they will in all likelihood kill him and his own circle of relatives sooner or later. Gsky whispers the call Xavier Quinn. He explains that Quinn works in military intelligence and has regulation enforcement contacts who could warn him if Gsky talked lower back with inside the gift. Duffy factors out that Quinn is the use of the identical tactic on Beck kidnapping and threats. Gurmo asks how Riacha and Cole manage it. The tale shifts lower back to the beyond wherein Cole is going via Quinn's report and discovers his historical past and a hidden $500,000 in Aruba. Personal Anthony Frascone then arrives with Telesal smartphone information displaying that Quinn has been calling Saifan Qasim, a Syrian national with Navy connections. The three of them wait outdoor a membership, and even as they stake it out, Pro explains what they are able to and cannot do to Qasim without making Quinn suspicious. From the lower back seat, Frascone casually mentions that he enjoys dancing, and Riacha notices that he has overwhelmed Cole as he awkwardly attempts to make his case, whilst Cole spots Kim and his protection element leaving the membership. They observe them into an alien technique, Qasim requesting a communication after scaring off his protection guards. Riacha convinces Qasim to assist them take down Quinn, and Cole takes him into custody earlier than leaving. Riacha holds Frascone lower back and offers him recommendation on staying secure in fight and a few steerage on the way to technique. Cole individually with inside the cabin. Agent Steven interrupts Duffy and Riacha asking if he can permit Cooper have a smoke. Duffy reminds him approximately their regulations on the way to deal with detainees and sends him lower back to look at their prisoner. The tale returns to the beyond wherein Riacha and Cole meet with General Matsuda, explaining that they want him to authenticate the blueprints as quickly as Quinn arms them to Qasim. Matsuda has the same opinion and desires them success. Later Cole indicates going to a bar for a drink even as they assessment the report. However, Riacha says it would not appearance proper, rather he grabs beers from his refrigerator and that they drink in his workplace at some point of the Edge operation. Riacha explains how Quinn and Kim change cash for the blueprints even as Frascone secretly information it. Frascone follows Quinn at the same time as Qasim offers the blueprints to Riacha and Cole. Again on the workplace, Cole examines the blueprints and confirms their actual. She lists the whole thing had to arrest. Riacha tells her she does incredible and merits to make the arrest with inside the gift. Riacha tells Duffy and Go that on why a few human beings are sincerely excellent, capable of assume without a doubt remedy troubles, act with integrity and realize while to be extreme or lighten the temper. Dominique Cole is one of these uncommon human beings and Riacha believes she has a vivid destiny. An hour later Garber offers Riacha espresso and reassures him that Cole might be on her manor. However, Riacha notices it's been 49 minutes. Garber shows texting her, however Riacha would not like texting. Nevertheless he sends a message asking if she's okay. She replies that Quinn is cuffed and she's heading in. However, the manner she writes her makes Riacha comprehend something everything is inaccurate. He fast leads a group to Quinn's residence and reveals Frescon useless, but Cole is lacking and symptoms display. Quinn takes her alive at HQ. Garber pulls up Quinn's juvenile document displaying he's a violent sociopath. Reactor is aware of Quinn will torture Cole. They discern out he is taking her to his farmhouse with ready. Reactor drives the telling Garber to name as soon as he has the precise cope with. While Garber calls again, Reactor estimates that he's 20 minutes away. Garber has already contacted the county police, however they're half-hour out. Reactor without a doubt says it would not be counted. He has no plans to relaxation. Quinn. Garber tells Reactor to attend to Quinn. While Reactor arrives on the belongings, he reveals the residence door locked, however sees a mild with inside the barn because the door creaks with inside. The wind and chimes jingle softly. Recollections flood his thoughts. In the barn he sees Cole placing via way of means of her tied palms from a rafter, her naked feet dangling, blood strolling down her legs and dripping from her feet. Crushed with grief he turns and walks out, slightly noticing her uniform at the ground. A noise catches his interest and he creeps round to a sub-level door. Searching through the window he sees digging via grain packing containers, stuffing cash into baggage. Quinn hears a jingle and turns in the direction of the door, noticing a series of bells placing there. The instant he steps outdoor, Reactor catches him off a protect, places a gun to his head and takes his weapon. Quinn attempts to speak his manner out, claiming he and Cole had been partners, however she receives grasping, forcing him to kill her. He even admits to the homicide and attempts to reduce a deal. Reactor ignores him and asks what Cole's first call is. When Quinn receives it incorrect, his lie is uncovered. He lunges at Reactor, however Reactor punches him and forces him at gunpoint to a cliff facade overlooking rough waters. Reactor tells Quinn that Cole's first call is Dominique, then shoots him with inside the head, sending him over the threshold. With inside the cabin, Reactor explains that he makes use of Quinn's Factor 22, however the bullet is just too small to kill him immediately. A flashback suggests Reactor taking Cole's frame down, masking her with a blanket and kneeling beside her till the police arrive. Once they ask in which Quinn is, Reactor sincerely says he has no concept. With inside the gift go nods he's lifeless. Severe says they are taking Quinn down for actual this time. Duffy seems uneasy. Reactor notices she exhales difficult, admits she forces Teresa undercover jail time, placing over her head like a blade, guilt's consuming her alive. Reactor do not choose, simply tells her he is pulled knee equal circulate earlier than lower back at Beck's property. Reactor sits with inside the kitchen crushing a few takeout, asks for espresso. Agnes pours, eyes locked on him, desires to recognize approximately Duke. Reactor continues it. Bloodless Duke ain't operating for Beck. No greater. Annette chimes in, checking if he is retaining up. He simply says it has been one hell of a night time. She nods, says they have been busy putting in place Beck's massive birthday bash that receives his interest visitor listing. He asks informal. Agnes fingers over the espresso. He nods, steps out. Subsequent morning, Annette knocks on his door retaining a bag of sparkling garments. He cracks it open. Status there in his boxers. She clocks it. Do not say a phrase he throws at the suit, however out of doors noise catches his ear. Richard's out through the carriage house swinging on a heavy bag. Reactor strolls up, tells him to hit him. Complete pressure. Richard's eye swings susceptible. Reactor ain't inspired. Begins evolved coaching. Combating ain't approximately electricity, it is approximately gambling. Dirty. From the residence Zachary Beck watches, then his Telesal smartphone is going off someplace else. Gillo and Duffy take a seat down in a vehicle. Gilos were given doubts approximately. Reactor. Duffy do not solution, simply pulls up Angel Doll's computer monitoring Teresa's vicinity. First prevent a tubing facility. Duffy alternatives the lock lower back at Beck's property. Matters flip brief. Beck yanks Reactor apart. Anxiety thick. Macabres were given a success. Angel Doll's computer computer pinged on the tubing joint. 3 guys already dispatched to Easy residence. Riacha is driving shotgun, ordered to position our bodies with inside the floor with inside the man. Riacha dials Duffy voicemail. He drops a message in with inside the facility. GMO assessments his phone. No sign. Duffy don't like that metallic roof's messing with reception. Out of doors MCB's guys pull up, locked, loaded, geared up to kill. Riacha drives to the tubing facility and calls Agent Stephen on the cabin to test on Duffy and Go. He tells Stephen that MC's guys are trying to find Angel Doll's computer. However, Duffy and Go are not answering their telephones. Stephen quick appears up the company's Telesal smartphone. Wide variety on the facility. McCabe's guys input with their weapons geared up. Harley spots Duffy close to the workplace store and indicators KS and Rusty to transport in while the Telesal smartphone earrings. Duffy realizes nobody must be calling if the ability is closed. Considering the fact that her Telesal smartphone nonetheless has no sign, she solutions. Besides, Stephen urgently warns her that McCabe's guys are coming. Gunfire breaks out as Duffy and GMO take Cowell and Hearth Place. Returned out of doors, Riacha hears the photographs and runs into Rusty. Rusty indicates a plan and Riacha nods. However, while Rusty turns away, Riacha shoots him with inside the head. KS fires at Duffy, however she drops, shoots him with inside the leg and movements in to complete him, leaving her badge at the ground. She then objectives at difficult Harry, however Riacha stops her, whispering that if he is the most effective survivor once more it'll appear suspicious. They want to allow Harley stay. Riacha tells her and Garmo to get away and throw the computer out the window. As they flee, Riacha grabs her badge, climbs onto the crates for a higher view and fires at Harley to sluggish him down. Duffy and Go pace away and toss the computer out the window. Harley rushes out of doors, capturing at their vehicle. Riacha pulls up in one in every of Beck's Audi and tells Harley he is Duke's alternative, urging him to get in as soon as interior. Riacha drives right into a dust pit, making the Audi get caught, and tells Harley to get out and push. Recognizing the computer close by, Harley reviews to McCabe, describing Duffy and GMO's federal sellers. Pissed off, McCabe hangs up. Harley appears at Riacha and says their boss is irritated. That's by no means a great component. Later, Guy Aero buys beers out of doors, eating place, and toasts their survival. Duffy, nonetheless dissatisfied over now no longer locating Teresa, remembers a case wherein a lacking boy become observed alive lengthy after being presumed lifeless. She insists Gila must believe like she does or live silent. He nods, subdued through her dedication. Returned at Beck's property, Riacha and Harley arrive on the Gate residence. Harley attempts to get Paulie to assist with the undertaking, however Paulie refuses. Once you have interior, Riacha pushes a wheelbarrow with KS's frame to the shoreline whilst Harley reminisces about past disposals. Riacha consists of KS to the pinnacle starting of a tidal cove and throws him in, letting the undertow bring him out to sea. They go back for Rusty's frame and take away him the equal manner. Later on, Harley warns Riacha that Paulie will need revenge for the prank with inside the weight room later. Riacha calls Duffy, who's riding by myself after losing GMO on the cabin to get his vehicle. They plan to break up and test addresses from Angel Doll's PC, which include a crate producer and uncommercial lubricant dealer. Riacha tells her he has her badge out of doors. Beck summons Riacha to the kitchen where Macabe's guys Hout and Tank are ready. As Agnes serves Riacha espresso, she casually mentions that the bins have been processed through a cat's digestive machine, even as he tactics that unsettling truth or what makes a crude observation to Annette and attempts to enhance the state of affairs. Riacha rapidly takes him down, smashing his head into the desk, then examines if Tank desires to assignment him. Tank fast backs down. Later, Riacha hides Duffy's badge in his pillowcase. A knock on the door exhibits a tray with a slice of pie and a notice analyzing Mercy on the cabin. Cooper hints Steven into giving him a cigarette, after which inhales a mouthful of rubbing alcohol as Steven flicks the lighter. Cooper blows the alcohol into his face, putting him on half place. He rushes Steven, stomps him to dying, unlocks his cuffs and takes his coat. Earlier than leaving, he locations a cigarette in his mouth and paradoxically thank you Steven's corpse for the smoke. Duffy arrives on the cabin even as on a name. With Ga noticing the open door, she carefully enters and discovers Steven's frame. Screaming in rage, Reacher brushing his enamel hears his Telecel smartphone buzz. Duffy informs him that Steven is useless and Cooper has escaped. Due to the fact Cooper does not have a Telecel smartphone, Reacher deduces that he's heading for Beck. Checking Steven's smartwatch, Duffy determines Cooper escaped 10 minutes in the past. Reacher tells Duffy she desires to provide him a purpose to go away the compound. He then calls Gurmo, who's on course to the cabin, and instructs him to power to the blind switch on the Manatee Beck's residence, park the auto and empty it to make it as mild as feasible. Guillermo, stressed, asks what is occurring and Reacher informs him that Cooper killed Steven. Gilmore right now quickens. In the meantime, Duffy drives as much as a strength transformer, pulls her gun and fires at it till it blows, knocking out strength throughout Beck's compound. Paulie steps out of the gatehouse with a flashlight, reveals Beck and Reacher internal and reviews their outage. Reacher shows it is able to be a precursor to an assault and volunteers to head down the street to forestall any ability threats. Beck calls McCabe to replace him and McCabe orders a complete seek of the residence and group of workers. Beck passes the order to Harley, Tank and Howard, who wake the group of workers and seek their rooms out. Doggo has emptied his automobile whilst Reacher arrives and instructs him to transport it into the center of the street so as to turn it over as soon as carried out. Reacher tells him to lie internal to pressure Cooper to go out his automobile and technique with inside the residence. Harley searches Reacher's room and Duffy's badge is seen putting away from bed with inside the pillowcase mendacity on his again with inside the overturned automobile. Jallo chuckles to himself. Reacher asks what is so humorous and Gillo says he is giggling due to the fact he looks like he is residing the conventional tale of a cop getting killed proper earlier than retirement. Reacher figures Cooper will forestall earlier than hitting the auto. Simply as predicted, Cooper rounds the nook, brakes and springs to a forestall. He receives out and crouches. Subsequent to Go, who opens his eyes and says that is for Steven proper earlier than Reacher shoots Cooper with inside the head. A bit later, Reacher calls Duffy simply as she finishes telling Steven's father approximately his son's dying. He tells her Cooper is lifeless too. She has already made up a cowl tale to preserve the deer off their backs, however plans to inform the fact after they locate Teresa again at Beck's place. Reacher notices the gate residence is empty. With inside the residence a device gun hangs from the ceiling swinging from chains and the entirety is eerily quiet. Following the sound of voices, he enters Beck's observe, in which Beck, Paulie and Harley are ready. Reacher reviews that under the influence of alcohol motive force hit to energy transformer which induced the outage. Beck tells him that at the same time as he became long gone, McCabe ordered a complete seek of the residence whilst Reacher asks in the event that they located something. Beck begins evolved speaking approximately a trot in his domestic running with the feds. Sensing problem, Reacher quietly reaches for a metallic alarm clock at the back of him. Beck opens a table drawer and pulls out a small Telecel smartphone same to Reacher's, which became located in Annette's room. She was sending intel to the ATF each week. Reacher gives to interrogate her, however Harley informs him that Paulie already killed her. Reacher confronts Paulie and punches him with inside the intestine, however it has no impact. Paulie retaliates, hitting Reacher so difficult that he collapses. Richard, stepping into the entrance, watches as Reacher struggles to upward thrust. Later, as Reacher and Harley needed to retrieve Annette's frame, Harley complains that he had deliberate to spend the weekend on his boat, however now has to choose up the slack left through Angel Doll's absence. Angry, Reacher punches him with inside the belly. off sufficient to make him vomit that night time. Richard examines in on Riacha and accuses him of being frightened of Paulie. Riacha denies it, pointing out that he honestly hasn't figured Paulie out, but he then calls Duffy to record that Annette changed into ATF. Because of this, that Beck and McCabe are going for walks. Weapons now no longer pills. The puzzle portions click on into place. Beck's full-time mechanic, the commercial lubricant dealer. Beck is not dealing pills, he is shifting untraceable firearms. McCabe's most important sale is drawing close, and his patron may be any quantity of crook companies. The following morning, Beck unearths Riacha sitting on his mattress, having now no longer slept. McCabe has known as them to the warehouse, and Beck, nevertheless blanketed in Annette's blood, indicates cleansing up first. In the meantime, Duffy and go away dinkies with coffees and take out baggage, while Riacha calls to inform them approximately his summons. Duffy at once figures out that he is approximately to fulfill Quinn and tells him to preserve his Telesal smartphone on so she and Gilmo can lower back him up. As they speak, Riacha tells her Teresa is already lifeless. However, Duffy would not reply. He leaves his Telesal smartphone on and heads out at the manor. He and Beck bet how the assembly would possibly move. Duffy and Gilmo are already in function, looking the warehouse earlier than they come in. Crates of guns are being checked. Beck appears at Riacha and asks if he is geared up to fulfill the boss. Riacha grips the gun in his waistband and honestly says he has been looking ahead to this second for a long term. Riacha and Beck are in McCabe's warehouse, surrounded through men dealing with guns. Riacha has a gun tucked in his waistband and a Telesal smartphone in his pocket left on so Duffy and Gurmo can concentrate. McCabe storms in, pissed that Beck employed an ATF agent to smooth his residence. He threatens to kill Beck, concerned he will mess the whole lot up, however admits the shoppers nevertheless count on to address him out of doors. A automobile pulls up. Duffy notices a man sporting an inexperienced get-dressed in a garment bag clean from a tailor. She figures it is for Teresa, which means she's nevertheless alive. In a McCabe walks as much as Riacha, pronouncing hiring him changed into the neatest component Beck has carried out in weeks. He asks for Riacha's call, however would not understand it, then introduces himself. Riacha notices the get-dressed and Mab smirks, announcing it's not anything as compared to what it is happening. He mentions the woman, announcing she'd already be useless if she wasn't a redhead, which takes place to be the client's desire. Loud honking fills the warehouse as a motorcade arrives. McCabe tells Riacha to face in the back of him and appearance intimidating, caution the others now no longer to attract their guns until he does. First outdoor, Taraf sits in his vehicle completing a name. McCabe tells him the bag being positioned in his trunk is only a small price now, no longer the overall quantity. Taraf reminds him that wasn't the deal. McCabe apologizes, announcing the sale were given not on time. Taraf throws out a Russian proverb and McCabe interprets it: provide a person a fingernail, he's going to take the forearm after took Taraf and his vehicle's power off. McCabe tells Harley to discover who has been searching into him at the manor. Returned to Beck's residence, Beck tells Riacha that McCabe borrowed cash from the Russian mob. Riacha makes it clean McCabe has to pay on time or he is useless. In the meantime, Duffy and go to the get-dressed maker, who says he turned into employed to make her attractive get-dressed for a redhead. He would not recognize the client's call, however fingers over a touch variety at Beck's carriage house. Riacha spots Richard taking walks towards the water after sending a message on his Telesal smartphone. Riacha follows and convinces him to return back into Metropolis for epoxy to restore a toy gun he were given for his dad's birthday. Richard hesitates, however consents. Riacha drops him off on the stores, announcing he is grabbing espresso as a substitute. He meets Duffy in an alley and fingers returned her badge. She says they were given a Telesal smartphone variety from the get-dressed maker. Nobody spoke back, however Go has a touch on the mobile issue, who can take a look at the decision logs. Riacha tells her approximately Taraf and McCabe's debt to the Russian mob. Duffy thank you him for now no longer killing McCabe while he had the hazard. Riacha explains why and he or she kisses him. He kisses returned, however she abruptly pulls away, announcing it might not appear once more. He would not get it. Then Gero arrives loudly announcing he needed to pass the auto. Riacha is amazed to look him and warns Duffy to get GMO out of there now. She would not apprehend till Richard walks into there. Ali and acknowledges go, because the cop Riacha supposedly killed at the manor returned to Beck's. Richard needs the reality. Riacha pulls over, yanks him out and holds him nevertheless, so he's going to pay attention. He apologizes for mendacity, however explains that he turned into recruited to discover Teresa and plans to kill McCabe at Beck's residence. Agnes brings in tuxedos for Richard and Riacha. Beck asks her to test Annette's antique room for the RSVP visitor listing after she leaves. Richard and Riacha input and Beck notices something is off with Richard. Richard lies, pronouncing town bullies had been bothering him once more, however that Riacha dealt with it. As Riacha approximately to depart, Beck accuses him of seeking to be Richard's father. Riacha says he is simply searching out for the child. Simply as he appears out for Beck, it is his process. Beck warns that humans in that process get shot. Loads in Rock Creek, Virginia. An aged neighbor knocks on Warrant Officer Powell's door asking if his water stress is okay. Powell opens the door, to discover the neighbor being held at gunpoint via way of means of McCabe's guys. They shoot the antique guy and flip their weapons on Powell, certainly considered one among them calls McCabe, reporting that Powell has been captured and that their group in Chicago will circulate quickly. In Chicago, in Eagle's workplace, she receives as much as make a warm drink, leaving her sidearm on her table. In the meantime, with inside the elevator, guys connect silencers to their guns. The elevator dings whilst they come. The guys take a look at her workplace first, however the microwave beeps, revealing that she's with inside the kitchen, certainly considered one among them heads there. However Neagle ambushes him, knocking him to the floor. Neagle hides beneath a few desks and logs right into a PC, sending a print process to their pictograph copier. The noise distracts each guys, drawing them to the copier room, giving her a danger to run lower back to her workplace. They chase her, capturing, however their bullets miss and shatter the glass wall. Rather, she grabs her gun and shoots, certainly considered one among them, taking her Telecel smartphone and a clean clip. She tracks the alternative man to the kitchen. In the meantime, McCabe's goons are beating Powell whilst McCabe watches over video chat. Seeing Powell may not communicate, McCabe orders them to reduce him open and allow him bleed out. In Chicago, Negley unearths the second one guy sitting at the kitchen ground, maintaining his belly, in which she shot him. He asks her to name 911, however she name callings and eats a bowl of cereal rather. Whilst he begs for a health practitioner, she tells him if he offers up the call of who employed him, she would possibly name a person. He confesses they had been dispatched via way of means of Costopolos due to the fact she turned into investigating Angel Doll, and Paulie Negley calls Riacha to inform him what took place. However, figuring out McCabe is searching down all people he labored with, he hangs up. She then calls an ambulance, however informs the injured guy it will arrive in 5 minutes. He's going to be lifeless in a single on the 110th. Investigators weighed choices up Riacha's name, getting to know Powell is half hour past due for his shift. Riacha tells her to ship 3 armed officials to check his house. Meanwhile, Beckys is in Richard's studios searching at a portrait whilst he notices a quick transferring vehicle coming into the assets. McCabe, Paulie and others input the residence. Beck meets them with inside the lobby, in which McCabe accuses him of being worried with Navy individuals from the 110th. Unique investigators. Beck admits Riacha turned into a part of the 110th. McCabe then orders Paulie to kill Riacha. Paulie unearths Riacha's room empty. Searching outdoor, he spots Riacha jogging throughout The garden Riacha rushes to the carriage house, grabs the snowplow keys and shoots the tires of all different cars as Paulie and Harley technique. Riacha bursts out with inside the snowplow, smashing through a storage door. He speeds away, dodging Gadget Gun Hearth Place from the Gat residence at their motel. Duffy and Go talk the case. Riacha calls Duffy, telling her to choose him up due to the fact his journey turned into shot out earlier than he can give an explanation for. MCB's guys chase him on ATVs jogging into the woods. Riacha shoots one rider and disables the lighting fixtures on ATVs. The use of dust for camouflage. He sneaks up on one man and breaks his neck. The following receives stabbed with inside the throat even as the final is killed. The use of an ATV's retracting cable. Riacha then emerges close to Metropolis and heads to a laundromat, presenting the aged proprietor's coins to shut. Early in the meantime, Paulie unearths his lifeless guys with inside the woods. He enters town attempting to find Riacha. However, he has no clue in which he is hiding. Annoyed, he heads again with inside the laundromat. Riacha waits for his garments in only a small towel. The proprietors kindly carry him a moist fabric to smooth up and a cup of espresso. He thank you them, joking that it is higher than the same old awful espresso at Beck's residence. Paulie leans in and whispers to McCabe. McCabe nods and orders Richard to be added. Downstairs, Beck attempts to argue, however McCabe grabs a revolver, empties the chambers and locations it at the desk with one married bullet. Beck steps ahead, however Paulie shuts him up via way of means of aiming a gun at Richard's head. Richard selections up the revolver and factors it at Paulie, however McCabe tells him the percentages are not in his desire. He were given a 20% risk of killing Paulie, even as Paulie will genuinely kill Beck. Richard appears at his father, then turns the gun on himself and pulls the cause. Not anything takes place. McCabe tells him to do it once more. Richard obeys. Beck panics, presenting McCabe something, however Cab simply laughs and says he wishes an identical set of ears on the motel. Riacha, Duffy and Gilmore pass over their findings. Jallo's Telesal smartphone employer Touch pulls up a variety of from Port Rome. Riacha acknowledges it as Harley's, which means Teresa is on his boat. Riacha and Duffy swim out and seek beneath deck. They do not locate her, however they see clean symptoms and symptoms she turned into. They're tied up and drugged out of doors. A motorboat techniques. Harley steps onto the deck, spots water at the ground, and pulls his gun as he movements beneath deck. Duffy grabs his arm. The shot is going off, hitting a lantern. Flames unfold. Speedy Harley attempts to run, however they chase him lower back onto the deck. Duffy kilos him even as Riacha dumps greater flammable liquid beneath. Harley refuses to speak, so Riacha stabs his foot with a fish gaff. As the hearth place rages, Harley eventually cracks McCabe, moved Teresa, and changed the time and place of the weapon sale. That is all they want. They hop onto the motorboat and depart. Harley to head up in flames together along with his boat lower back at the quay. They alternate out in their moist fits. Riacha smirks, teasing Duffy, approximately sneaking peeks at him. She rolls her eyes irritated, then asks what they are imagined to do now that their remaining leads simply exploded. He grins and tells her to percent sunscreen. They are heading to Los Angeles in Boston. Duffy drives Riacha to look Teresa's grandmother, Mrs. Daniel. They have got breakfast together along with her and percentage a deep communique. Earlier than heading to the airport, decided to locate Teresa. In the meantime, in Chicago, Negley catches a person named Kostopoulos off Shield. Even as he is grabbing his newspaper in his bathrobe, he is the only who dispatched killers after her, and under pressure he speedy confesses that Julius McCabe ordered the hit, whilst Negley brings up the call Xavier Quinn. Kostopoulos turns faded and frequently everybody is aware of approximately him. Years in the past, Quinn ran an export enterprise in Chicago. However, whilst the proprietors refused to paintings with him, he wiped them out and took over. Later he moved his operation to Bizabazar. Kostopoulos figures Quinn is tying up loose ends earlier than moving once more. That means the Becks are subsequent. Negley decks him and walks away. In Los Angeles, Riacha Reacher and Duffy move over hidden pictures of a drug lord named Darian. His enemies preserve disappearing waiter guns from Beck and Quinn. Duffy and Elliot had tracked Darian for days, noticing how predictable his recurring turned into. Reacher spots something with inside the pictures and tells Duffy to zoom in. She does not get it at the beginning, however Reacher says it proves they have got him. He makes a name for backup and Duffy receives hyped evaluating it to whilst she uncovered her dishonest text. She asks if this facilitates with main. Reacher says if matters move proper they have got a 25% shot at achievement. She presses him on whether or not, which means taking down Quinn or saving Teresa. Reacher assures her that when assembly misses Daniel and seeing Duffy's determination, Teresa's rescue might not come second to Quinn's downfall. Inspired with the aid of using Reacher's phrases, Duffy all of a sudden pulls off her blouse and kisses him her in advance. Protests do not depend anymore now. She definitely is aware of who he is, that they come to be in Mattress collectively. Later they tune Darian to a poolside membership and persuade him to move for a trip. They take him to his gallery in which he insists his commercial enterprise is authentic. Reacher brings up the federal 3 moves regulation. 3 violent felonies mean existence in jail. Darian already has with inside the surveillance pictures. Reacher observed him parking in a handicapped spot with a health practitioner's placard. They discovered the doctor who admitted he changed into threatened into faking Darian's knee arthritis prognosis that counts as extortion, making it a 3rd strike. Darian protests that he in no way threatened the health practitioner. Reacher admits the health practitioner denied it too. However, while confronted with dropping his scientific license, he's going to say anything they need. Darian realizes Reacher and Duffy are the usage of extortion in opposition to him. Reacher tells him they simply want to choose. Darian calls back and needs a guns shipment, announcing he's going to ship a person from Baltimore with the price. After placing up, he orders Reacher and Duffy to go away. However, Duffy makes a name and deer marketers flood in at the same time as and Duffy might not pursue the parking by skip fraud. The deer accountants will tear aside Darian's gallery budget. Knowing he is doomed, Darian surrenders. Duffy cheers and factors out Rhonda's face at the display screen. Nevertheless, amused with the aid of using her ex's betrayal returned in Portland, Maine, Reacher and Duffy reunite with Gurmo and stake out the standard trade web page among Beck and Darian. Beck arrives with a bandage over his proper rear. Negley steps out of every other vehicle posing as Darren's guy from Baltimore. While Beck methods, she warns him to fake they're creating a gun deal for his guard's sake. She famous Reacher dispatched her and warns that if he does not cooperate, he and Richard are useless. She needs information about the huge purchase, hoping to forestall Quinn earlier than he remoff. Then Beck admits Quinn modified the plan and did not percentage it with him. His handiest commands are to recognition on his celebration, which Quinn might not permit him cancel. Negley sees no need in him and turns to go away. Beck stops her, determined for assist to get away with Richard. She tells him they cannot assist until he enables them first. He then well-known shows that customers from Yemen are flying in that day to a personal airfield. She palms him a slip of paper and receives with inside the vehicle. Earlier than she leaves, he insists Richard had no component in his crimes. She reassures him that Reacher is aware of and that Richard has not anything to worry. In the meantime, Quinn arrives at a deserted warehouse in which Teresa is held with inside the basement. He tosses her a few meals and water, telling her humans are trying to find her as he receives equipped to inject her with tablets. He tells her that if she weren't precious to his customers, he might have used her himself, then chopped her up and dumped her frame. She listens without reacting whilst he movements nearer. She fights slower back. However, regardless of how plenty she struggles, he forces the needle into her arm. At a resort, Duffy palms out lunch to Reacher, Negley and Go. They pass over information about the Yemeni customers. Reacher figures out the guns are intended for a terrorist assault on US soil. Duffy makes a decision to begin calling round to look which personal flights from Yemen have landed. Negley asks to speak to Riacha by myself with inside the next room. She brings up Quinn. She desires to understand how he survived. Riacha explains and she or he factors out this is not like their beyond fights in Margrave or New York. Quinn's guys are excessive, educated and armed to the enamel. Riacha asks if she's having second mind. She says no, however she desires it clean, that she is aware of how risky that is. Whilst she tells him how she tracked down Kostopoulos, he realizes she knew he became in Portland earlier than he even known as her. Approximately the edge. Understanding Riacha cares approximately Duffy. Negley warns him to maintain her out of the very last combat. He says there is no manner Duffy will agree and Gilmo could be proper together along with her at domestic. Richard is solving his toy gun whilst Beck startles him. Richard attempts to cover it, however Beck concerns it is probably actual. He lifts the claw and sees it is only a toy. Richard explains the epoxy wishes an afternoon to set. Beck is stuck off defend, remembering gambling with a toy gun as a child. They communicate approximately how Richard modified after his mother's demise. Beck admits he became bloodless and remote on motive. Questioning it might support our could up in case he misplaced any other figure. He apologizes for his errors and promises to guard Richard from Macabre. He tells Richard he likes the toy gun, places it down and hugs his son on the airfield. Neagle watches the Yemenis step off their aircraft and get into motors. Riacha checks in through Telesal smartphone and she or he confirms they are at the Circulate at Beck's workplace. Macabre beverages scotch at his table as Beck walks in. Beck reviews that the storehouse is prepared for the guns deal. Macabre tells him to remember stock because the vans get loaded. Beck asks where in the vans are headed. Macabre says the deal is on the salvage backyard at 9:00 and Beck need to go away, his party to be there. He assures Beck there may be time for cake with Richard later on. Beck says Richard goes to a film at some stage in the celebration, however Macabre grabs his best suitably traumatic that Richard live domestic till the deal is finished. He accuses Beck of making plans a betrayal. Beck backs down and is of the same opinion to hold Richard with inside the residence. In the meantime Negley tails the Yemenis to their motels and examines them with Riacha. He tells her to live on them on the way to lure each facets of the deal. Beck calls Riacha and confirms the purchase is occurring at 9:00 on the salvage backyard. Duffy and Go arrive and recommend related to the ATF due to the huge variety of guns. Riacha refuses, understanding the ATF will attempt to save him from taking revenge on Quinn. Duffy insists she's assembly with the ATF and if Riacha would not adore it he should not come. Annoyed Riacha leaves to get espresso on the ATF workplace. Manager Sears is livid that Duffy waited so lengthy to record their lifeless agent. He's taking the intel and makes a decision the ATF will ship a crew. Duffy argues that in addition they misplaced an agent and that her informant is in chance. Sears is of the same opinion to allow them to live with inside the surveillance van, however not anything else. Riacha indicates the ATF ought to additionally arrest Macabre's guys at Beck's celebration. Sears asks why Riacha is even concerned. Riacha explains his deal to take down Quinn. Sears tells him to live with inside the van with Duff and Gilo. Riacha refuses and walks out. As he leaves, Sears warns that he has to record Duffy's moves to the Diego attempts to take the blame, however Duffy might not permit him on the hotel Go. Hundreds the auto at the same time as Duffy and Riacha speak. Riacha says he desires his Rhonda second, that means non-public justice. Duffy receives it, however says her cognizance is on saving Teresa on the storehouse. Beck tells the foreman to complete loading the vans and meet him on the salvage backyard after he modifications for his celebration at domestic. Beck facilitates Richard together along with his bow tie and tells him to fasten himself in his room at 9:00 McCabe cuts in, telling Beck to rush up on the salvage backyard. ATF dealers take their positions because the vans roll in observed with the aid of using Beck's vehicle with inside the surveillance van. Reacher receives stressed and steps out of doors for air. Duffy follows and unearths him setting collectively a sniper rifle. They argue, however she offers up and is going again to the van. Reacher units up and calls Negley, telling her to vanish. While that is over, a 2D car pulls up and he tells her the customers have arrived. However, Negley, nonetheless following them, says they're nonetheless at the flow. She describes her area and Reacher realizes the deal is virtually going on at Beck's residence. The salvage backyard is only a setup to take Beck down. Reacher fast realizes the salvage backyard assembly is a setup and cuts off his name with Negley to cope with it. ATF retailers anticipate the customers to step out of their automobile. However, Beck stands the burden with the aid of using the postpone. Up above, Reacher spots Quinn's guys creeping in from the perimeters. He pulls out his sniper rifle and drops of them earlier than the relaxation open half place at the ATF retailers. Beck scrambles into his automobile even as Duffy and Go throw on bulletproof vests and ram the surveillance van immediately into the chaos. Reacher selections off extra enemies earlier than storming into the backyard. He weapons down one together along with his pistol head, but some other steals his rifle and takes him out. Duffy and Go slide at the back of the van for canopy even as Reacher grabs some other weapon off a useless guy and maintains transferring he's taking out some other shooter as Beck attempts to slide away. One in all, McCabe's warehouse guys spots Beck and is going after him. However, earlier than he can end the process, Reacher places a bullet in his head. Beck, Reacher, Duffy and Gurma regroup and understand the actual guns deal goes down at Beck's residence. Beck confirms Teresa became already there earlier than the celebration even began. Out all at once a Telesal smartphone chimes. Reacher unearths one in all McCabe's guys seeking to ship a backup request. He shoves a gun in his face and forces him to delete it. As a substitute, he makes him kinda brand new one, all precise heading again. Now in the meantime at Beck's residence, McCabe blends in with the visitors even as the Yemen customers arrive out of doors. Negley lurks with inside the timber looking poorly defend the doorway. Reacher calls to file that everybody on the salvage backyard is useless besides for him, Duffy, GMO, Beck and the captured guy. The plan is straightforward: power their truck immediately into the compound and seize it. The man Mabe's guy takes the wheel of the primary truck even as Go struggles to maintain up with inside the 2D. In the celebration, McCabe greets the Yemenis and palms their boss Nasser a image of an subconscious Teresa. He tells them she's a goodwill present to make up for delivery delays. Nasser says they will revel in the celebration first, then cope with the deal. McCabe consents and offers him the important thing to Teresa's room. Out of doors, Paulie waves the vans in as they park. Reacher appears for rope to tie up the motive force, however reveals none. Paulie strategies, telling them to transport the vans to the opposite facet of the carriage house. Duffy shouts for Reacher to have the motive force agree, however it is too past due. The motive force is already useless due to the fact Reacher could not locate rope. He tells the others to locate Teresa and Richard even as he offers with Paulie. Beck leads the organization via the basement to sneak in. Paulie opens their truck door and the motive force is useless. Frame falls out. Reacher ambushes with a belt round his neck and that they combat. Duffy climbs via a basement window and shall we the others in. Negley adjustments into catering group of workers, garments borrowed from Beck and Gummo. Beck tells Duffy Teresa might be with inside the east wing even as Go heads closer to Richard's room as Paulie and Reacher combat. Negley blends into the birthday celebration, searching out McCabe and Quinn. The brawl movements into the carriage residence wherein each guys come to be buried below fertilizer baggage at the 0.33 ground. One in every of McCabe's guys spots GMO leaving the toilet and that they combat. And Richard hears the commotion from his room. Paulie digs out and reveals Reacher subconscious. He grabs a series, wraps it round Reacher's neck and pulls him closer to the rafters. Reacher wakes up, climbs slams the chain braces towards the rafter and yanks the pulley free. It is assumed he falls out of doors. Paulie hears the crash and turns to look. Reacturizing with a lawn rake with inside the lavatory go knocks out his opponent. The usage of an electric-powered shaver and a bathroom tank lid catching his breath. He spots Richard peeking in and assures him he is there to assist. In the meantime, Paulie and Reacher combat spills onto the garden. Rolling down closer to the water's side, they fall right into a riptide hollow wherein Paulie drags Reacher. Returned below, they war till Reacher throat punches Paulie and leaves him sinking. Duffy searches the East Wing for Teresa on the birthday celebration. Negley reveals Quinn, however, is stuck with the aid of using the top caterer. Thinking fast, she claims she become employed to analyze robbery most of the group of workers and asks him to maintain watch whilst she returns to the birthday celebration. She realizes Quinn is long gone. In the meantime, Reacher takes the streets. Returned closer to the residence, however, in the back of him Paulie emerges from the wooded area badly injured. However, nevertheless, following the sluggish painful chase is on. Reacher reaches the gate residence first, wherein the established system gun is waiting. Paulie follows near. In the back of they combat difficult. However, Paulie receives manipulate of the gun and targets at Attainer, bragging approximately his electricity. He pulls the cause, however the gun backfires. Paulie chokes on his personal blood as Reacher watches. He had jammed the barrel with a bullet from the belt to make certain it might blow up. Interior, Duffy reveals Teresa, however she is so drugged she will be able to slightly flow downstairs. McCabe interrupts as we're the second one in control of the Yemen consumers complains approximately the put-off he desires the deal performed speedy. Due to the fact he has any ot her assembly, he asks approximately Nasser, and Wally tells him Nasser went upstairs to test out his gift. Upstairs, Duffy hears footsteps. Nasser enters the room together along with his bodyguard, telling him to attend on the door. Interior, he handiest sees Teresa mendacity at the mattress while he begins evolved undressing. Duffy steps out together along with her gun drawn. Reacher, now dry and armed with a shotgun, reveals the gun and cracks open the crates. McCabe's guy Rusty leads Wed and any other guy into the constructing. However, Reacher kills them each. He shoots any other via a door. Interior, Negley and Duffy listen the pictures. Nasser requires his bodyguard, however Duffy shoots him with inside the crotch. The bodyguard rushes in and he or she takes him down too. Nasser groans in ache till she finishes him off with a headshot. She facilitates Teresa up and leads her out. Reacher crosses the garden, enters the kitchen and takes out of MCB's guys on his manner to the birthday celebration. The Yens begin seeking out W, however McCabe intercepts them. He shoots them and grabs the satchel of coins. Gunfire breaks out among MCB's guys and the Yemen consumers, sending the birthday celebration visitors right into a frenzy. Beck hears the chaos and rushes to locate Richard in any other hallway. Go tells Richard to run, however Richard runs directly into McCabe. McCabe grabs him and drags him into Beck's observe at the same time as grabbing greater guns. Beck arrives keeping the toy gun Richard had given him. He orders McCabe to allow Richard cross. McCabe, questioning the gun is actual, lowers his weapon. Richard actions to Beck's aspect, however the toy gun crumbles in Beck's fingers. McCabe realizes the trick and fires. Beck shoves Richard apart, however takes the hit. Richard reveals an automated weapon and fires wildly, forcing McCabe to run. Richard kneels beside his demise father as Negley arrives and takes with inside the scene Richard, Beck's frame and the stolen cash. In the meantime, Quinn McCabe sprints down the corridor. Reacher spots him, however receives pinned down via way of means of a Yeni shooter. He is taking the fellow out, however Quinn escapes out the front door simply because the Russians pull up. Takrov steps out and needs his cash from McCabe. Whilst McCabe comes up empty, Takarov offers the order to take him. Reacher steps in and makes it clean. McCabe is his. Takarov factors out that Reacher is outnumbered and on my own, however then Gurmo and Duffy see Negley steps out of doors. With the satchel of coins Andy gives to chauffeur McCabe, Takarov threatens to take each the cash, and McCabe, however, Negley pulls the pin from a grenade caution that if he does now no longer make a deal he'll get not anything. Takarov comes to a decision. The cash is greater critical and takes it, leaving McCabe. Quinn at the back of Gero allows Richard at the same time as Duffy requires an ambulance for Teresia, noting that it'll take some time, giving Reacher time to complete matters. Negley tells Reacher to do what he should and walks interior. Quinn fast attempts to goodbye for his existence. Reacher now believes Quinn honestly had amnesia, however he says it does now no longer rely what topics is that her call became Dominique. Quinn's expression modifications as he recalls the closing time Reacher stated the one's phrases to him. Reacher is aware of Quinn recalls now and shoots him with the aid of using morning. Richard seems out on the gate residence and partitions. Reacher asks if he'll tear them down, however Richard is uncertain. Reacher throws him the keys and tells him to take the cash and run. That is his shot at freedom. As Reacher heads out he crosses paths with Go and that they desire each other well. Out of doors Duffy is ready. She's leaving the deer and has already made certain Reacher and Negley are with inside the clean. She says she's now no longer into relationships and is transferring on. Negley stands with the aid of using her vehicle with breakfast and espresso. Reacher mentions that Duffy gave him the identical goodbye speech he typically offers to others. Negley, amused, says she is familiar with him. He cannot stand those who suppose they could do something they need without effects, so he makes certain they pay for it later. Duffy and Guillermo acquire Agent Elliott's badge and Deer ID and supply them to his own circle of relatives. Reacher reveals a motorbike in Beck's garage and receives equipped to depart. Close by Richard empties Beck's secure, grabs his toy gun and packs his matters. Garmo arrives domestic with Flora and, earlier than he may even open the door, his spouse Maureen greets him with a grin. Returned on the compound, Reacher watches Richard loading his vehicle. Richard waves and Reacher offers him a nod. Richard drives off grinning. In Boston, Duffy brings Teresa domestic in Maine. Reacher rides away on his motorbike, disappearing into the distance.